Get ready. Get set. Hold on. It's going to be on the ride. Good morning, and welcome to the Matuszak Show for today, Monday, August 11th. Wow, the month is just flying by. August 11th, 2014. And I am the host of your show, Paul-Gregory Matuszak, and this is the Matuszak Show. What a weekend, folks. All kinds of things going on. You know, we had President Obama late last week on late Thursday night, say, yeah, we're going to start doing some actions in Iraq, and they've done several humanitarian drops onto Mount Sinaj, I think that's the name of it, up in northern Iraq, where the Yazidis are gathering and trying to hold up and keep from being massacred by Al-Qaeda Iraq, otherwise known as ISIS. And they've also conducted several drone strikes and other airstrikes into Iraq to kind of support the efforts of the Iraqi government there. Meanwhile, on the political side, the new prime minister of Iraq is suing the new president of Iraq for her lack of taking control of the country and misleading the public and stuff. Kind of interesting in the way their political scheme is kind of having its own internal issues. It kind of sounds like our own House of Representatives, or members thereof, looking at suing our president over Obamacare. Kind of interesting. It seems that we're not the only country that has that kind of thing going on. Oh, other things going on in the world. What can we look at? What kind of news do y'all need to know?
You don't have a right to know everything in a separation of powers government, my friend. That is the difference between a parliamentary government and a separation of powers government.
Yeah. I'm glad we don't have the kind of separation of powers government that Representative Norton is describing there. Because I don't know what the heck she's talking about, but it sure the heck ain't our Constitution, especially with that First Amendment kicking around, eh, folks? Well, Bo Bergdahl completed his interviews. I talked about that on Friday, and he's back at work while the investigation continues, and recommendations are kind of researched and they'll be made later on as to what's going to be done with him. Meanwhile, in Ferguson, Missouri, have you folks heard about this one yet? Ferguson, which I guess is it's a suburb of St. Louis. I don't know. Somebody from Missouri can kind of get me a little bit more cued in onto that area there. Never really lived there or been through there a few times. But anyway, there was a little bit of an altercation between a teenager and the local police, and I guess one of the local police officers shot the unarmed teen. Well, it so happens that this particular teen happened to have a darker pigment to his skin. That doesn't matter. It's an unarmed civilian who may or may not have been doing something wrong, but the question is, did he deserve to be shot? Probably not, but there's going to be, of course, an investigation, and it's going to go through the usual loops and hoops, and you have the local union getting involved, so there's only so much they can do to the police officer until he's found guilty or has official allegations or indictments filed against him. And of course, that's all because the union intervention. It's not really police corruption, as some people are alleging. But what did the local populace do? Well, let's flash back to 1968. You had a great man in 1968. Well, he had for years and years been talking about equal rights for all, a law that applies to one segment of the population should apply to the entire population. If somebody goes to ride a bus and pays their fare, they should be allowed to take seats. The only special kind of privileges should be granted maybe to the disabled, the physically mobility and challenged. But an older woman goes to take a seat on a bus, and she's told, no, you have to go and stand in the back because of the color of her skin, which we all know is wrong. I mean, me being a gentleman, if I saw an older woman getting on and there were no seats left, and she evidently had trouble standing or was rather encumbered, I'd probably give up my seat. But that's just the way I was raised. But anyway, in April of 1968, somebody decided to assassinate this gentleman who is going and talking about, equal protections under the law for all, and everybody having the same opportunity to succeed. Not the same outcomes, but the same opportunities to succeed. Well, somebody murdered him. So the population of people with the same skin pigmentation as Dr. Martin Luther King really took his message to heart, and they started doing rioting in all sorts of locations, in Washington, D.C., in Chicago, and other places. They started rioting. Now, back then, I mean, I wasn't even born. I was a few months from birth. Of course, I've heard the stories my entire life about what kind of transpired, considering I was gestating in my mother's womb at the time, at what went on within my own little family unit when that happened. But I've always sat back and kind of raised that huge question. If people are rioting, if somebody, a great leader who spreads a certain message, gets murdered, how does a riot continue his message? It doesn't. It does everything to subvert it and destroy it and eliminate all the good works that, like in the case of Dr. Martin Luther King, all the good works he did were screwed over by a bunch of, lack of better term, idiots who decided to start a riot. The riot didn't raise awareness. The riots shut down all the good works. If they had sat by and just held candlelight vigils and peaceful protests like Dr. Martin Luther King professed doing, the nonviolent works, if they had done that, it would have done so much more to push his message and made our country a better place. But no, what do? They tore down Dr. King's message by acting like a bunch of idiots. Well, this teenager gets shot in Ferguson, and what happens? A bunch of idiots, they claim it's a protest, but they're not protesting, they're rioting. They're stealing people's stuff. They're breaking people's property. That's not a protest, that's a riot. It's not an action to bring awareness over an injustice. It is criminal acts on a mass scale. And that's what was going on yesterday because of this tragedy, because some overzealous police officer shot an unarmed kid. And that is the truth of the situation. And the people there who are causing these riots are doing nothing to help the situation and everything to exacerbate it and aggravate it. Really, come on, people. Let's use our brains here. I understand that you have an emotional response there. And yes, you should emote. You should demonstrate those emotions, that outrage. But we need to engage our brains when we do so. If you really want to affect change, you really want to send out a message and say, hey, look, there's a problem here, we need to fix it, you don't make the problem worse. You don't go out and do something that requires an armed response. You don't go and cause a riot so that the rest of the police, one bad egg does not mean the entire police force is corrupt. I'm sure there may be another bad egg or two in there, but that doesn't mean the entire force is. So why do you go and start riots and force the good police officers who just want to do their jobs to have to strap on riot gear and load up and fear for their lives and fear for the lives of civilians? Or I hate using that term because it's a civilian police force. They're not military. But for the non-police, average, everyday citizens, why should I have to be feared for their lives because a bunch of jackasses think the best way to protest an injustice is to go out and do more crimes? It's universally stupid. There's no other way to put it. So that's what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. The police are up and having to treat it as though it's a martial law situation and worry about rioting mobs because a couple of people, because a whole mass of people couldn't engage their brains when an injustice happened. So it went for this isn't two wrongs don't make a right. You had one very bad wrong, and the idea of demonstrating against this one bad wrong is to commit a couple hundred, if not thousands, of additional wrongs that are just as bad in some cases. So, yeah, it's a tragedy that people are just making worse, folks, and yeah, it kind of weighs on my heart a little bit why people just can't. Who is it? It wasn't Rodney King. It was Reginald Denny that said, wasn't it? It was one of them. It was either him or Rodney King. One of the two who said, "Why can't we all just get along?" And this is really one of those situations. I mean, look at Rodney King. Beaten for no reason. It went to court, and there were some justifications were raised in court as to why they did this. Of course, the end of the court case, it decided what it decided, and it was terrible what happened to Rodney King. But how does rioting and breaking store windows and stealing stuff right that wrong? It doesn't, and that's the thing. The thing that y'all have to look at there is there's just no way to justify the riots, either with the Rodney King in L.A. or with the Ferguson riots. There's no way to justify these riots. There's no way to justify the riots when Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. No justification for that. In fact, like I said, there's everything but a justification for it in the Martin Luther King situation, because it took all the work that King did and flushed it down the toilet. It really was dumb. And this stuff going on in Ferguson, again, dumb. So we've got that going on, folks. And then let's turn our eyes back towards the national stage here. Evidently, there were some activities or President Obama said that he's going to do something about the immigration crisis since there was no movement on the bills. I mean, House of Representatives passed some pretty good legislation there. Well, it stalled in the Senate. It hasn't been voted on, so nothing has been done yet. So, what was the answer to that? Well, the allegations right now are that the rumors are there that are that Obama is planning on using his phone and his pen to enact whatever executive orders he can to kind of counter that. And then he's also supposedly going to use those same executive orders to try to, in his eyes, bolster the economy by granting work visas to the illegal aliens who are already here. It's not amnesty, it's a work visa. Okay. Just want to think about this just a little bit here. I've read Todd Staples' book. Todd Staples is the agriculture commissioner in Texas. And he ran for lieutenant governor and lost in the primary. And somebody else is running for his position later on this year when they have the voting in November. But he currently is the agriculture commissioner. Good guy. I sat and talked with him a little bit. I've read his book. And Todd Staples has some really good ideas on what to do with the border and what he's kind of attempted to do and helped to work with Governor Perry to do here in Texas. And he's brought in all kinds of experts, from the Defense Department, from former Border Patrol experts that may or may not still be with ICE, and talk with other experts, not just in Texas, but also Arizona and New Mexico, and came up with some solutions. He also talked to the local residents down at the southern border of Texas, people who own ranches and farms and orchards. We need a certain number of immigrant or migrant workers, not immigrant workers, but migrant workers, people who come over with work permits, legally come across the border, work for their day, and then go back home, or work for a few days, a couple of weeks, helping to pick crops and stuff. And they make a decent wage doing it. They still fall under the minimum wage laws within the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. So they come and they do that. And this, by and large, is work that most adult Americans won't do because it won't support a family here. It will in Mexico's economy, but not here. And to top it off, a lot of this is work that you probably don't want your teenage kids doing. It's long hours in the hot sun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, given the fact that this really is work that a lot of Americans just don't want to do for a living, it kind of makes sense because that brings the crops to the markets, and then you are going to be employing truck drivers and food processing personnel, and then it goes to the grocery stores. So now the grocery stores are selling stuff, and they're able to pay more employees to push more products. The food prices go down, so we can afford to eat. And because the food prices go down, that leaves a little bit more money for other things, like going to Redbox and buying, renting a movie, or going to the movies, or whatever. That spurs the economy. So that, from that perspective, makes sense. But do you really want to give this to a bunch of people who have already broken the law and coming here? And they're not coming here for those same jobs because they can't legally hold those jobs, and all those ranchers will not employ them because they stand to lose their ranches and their own income in doing so because of fines and stuff. So that's what the hints, the rumors are coming out of Washington on what Obama is going to be doing with this. So that's a solution to the border problem, as well as trying to generate economic growth. So y'all can guess my thoughts on this, and my thoughts are, no, it's wrong. It violates our own laws, and although granting these work permits may help with our economy, wouldn't it be smarter to give them to somebody who deserves them, somebody who's willing to do the right thing in the first place? That's kind of where my mentality is on the subject. But yeah. Well, folks, later on in the show, I'm probably going to talk education stuff, because I have a few education things to bring up. And so many of you know from some of my past writings and everything, the education is one of my hot button topics, right along with veterans' rights, the Second Amendment, and I've got several. But immigration also is one, because I've lived down near the border. I've seen stuff going on near the border that is just horrifying. In southern Arizona, where the coyotes, that's the two-legged kind, folks, are bringing over young ladies, and seeing the rape trees and the aftermath of them. In the town I was living in Arizona a couple of years ago, there's a call for a domestic dispute, and when the local police showed up, they went to go and do their knock, and they got shot at, and they almost got run over by a SUV, and of course they called in pursuit, and they chased the SUV, and they were being shot at by fully automatic AK-47s. These weren't the semi-automatic versions that we can legally buy here. These were fully automatic. You pull a trigger and it'll fire until you're out of bullets and have to reload. And they chased these guys. These guys actually ran through a gate, an unmanned gate of